She was 17 years old when she walked into Oxford University carrying 2 suitcases, 1 scholarship, and absolutely no idea that her life was about to be permanently rearranged by a man she hadn't met yet. Let that sit for a moment. 17. While most girls her age were navigating high school hallways and Saturday night plans, Dorothy James was navigating one of the most prestigious universities in the world. Younger than everyone around her, sharper than most of them, and quietly terrified in the specific way of someone who has worked too hard to admit they are afraid. She was studying architecture. Not because it was practical, not because someone told her to, but because Dorothy had always believed that the most important thing a person could do was build something that outlasted them, something load-bearing, something permanent. She had no idea she was about to meet someone who would become exactly that. The library on a Tuesday afternoon, 3rd week of term. Dorothy was deep in an argument with her structural engineering professor, a brilliant, impatient man who did not particularly enjoy being challenged by students, and especially did not enjoy being challenged correctly by students who were 17. She had found an error in his load distribution model. She pointed it out with the careful precision of someone who had checked her work 3 times before speaking. She was right. She knew she was right. And then she laughed at herself, not at the professor, not at the error, but at the particular absurdity of being 17 in a room full of adults and still being the one to find the mistake. It was not a polished laugh. It was completely unguarded and entirely real, and it filled the library corner in a way that made several people look up from their books. One of them was Deron Hayes, 24 years old, American, engineering postgraduate. He had been at Oxford for 8 months and had found most of it impressive and some of it extraordinary and none of it particularly surprising. Until that laugh. He told her later, much later, on a bridge in the dark, that it wasn't her face that stopped him. It was the laugh at her own correctness. The specific joy of someone who loves being right but loves the absurdity of being human even more. He didn't introduce himself that afternoon. He simply watched her gather her notes with the unhurried attention of a man who has just recognized something rare and is being careful not to startle it. Dorothy walked home that evening completely unaware that anyone had noticed her at all. She was wrong about that. She would not be wrong about much else. This is a real love story, and it is just getting started. Speech balloon. If you have ever walked into a room and changed someone's life without knowing it, comment yes below. And if someone did that to you, tell us about it. This comment section is for the real ones. Bell, subscribe and hit the bell. They became friends the way most important things happen, slowly, then all at once. It started with the library. Deron began appearing in Dorothy's corner of the architecture section with the casual consistency of someone who had always studied there and had absolutely not rearranged his schedule to do so. Dorothy noticed. She said nothing. She was 17 and sharp, and she noticed everything. Their first real conversation lasted 4 hours. She did not intend for it to last 4 hours. She had a structural analysis due Thursday and a reading list that was 3 weeks ahead of where she needed to be. But Deron asked her one question about load-bearing theory, and Dorothy made the mistake of answering honestly, and 4 hours disappeared like 4 minutes, and she walked back to her dormitory at midnight genuinely unsure what had just happened to her evening. Or to her. This became their pattern. Tuesday library sessions that stretched past closing. Campus walks that neither one initiated formally, and neither one ended easily. Conversations that moved from architecture to engineering to philosophy to the specific details of their childhoods. Dorothy growing up with a mother who built things with her hands. Deron growing up with a father who designed things on paper. two people who came to the same ideas from different directions. He was 24. He knew exactly what was happening. He moved slowly because she was 17, and he respected what that meant. He moved slowly because anything worth having deserved patience. He moved slowly because Dorothy James was not someone you rushed toward. She was someone you approached with the same care you would give a remarkable structure, understanding the load first before you tested the foundation. 6 months of almost. 6 months of conversations that ended one sentence before they should have. 6 months of walks that stopped just short of somewhere. 6 months of Dorothy returning to her room and replaying the evening with the precise analytical mind she applied to everything except this, and arriving at no clean conclusion. Then one evening in their 7th month, standing on the Oxford Bridge with the city lights scattered across the water below them, Deron stopped walking. He turned to her. He said she was the most interesting person he had encountered in 2 countries and 2 degrees, and he wanted her to know that before another day passed without her knowing it. Dorothy kissed him before he finished the sentence. Not because she had planned to, because her body understood something her mind was still calculating and acted on the information first. What followed were 2 years that Dorothy would later describe to her daughter as the clearest she had ever felt. Study sessions that became something warmer, weekends that became necessary. A relationship that built itself with the same intention Dorothy brought to everything, load-bearing, deliberate, designed to last. Then Deron graduated. The airport departure gate, his flight number on the board behind him, his hands holding hers across the barrier. Permanent things don't need you to watch them to stay standing, he told her. She believed him. She watched his gate close anyway. Speech balloon comment love if you have ever fallen in love before you had the right words for it. This comment section is yours. Tell us your story. Bell subscribe. New York took Deron first. That is the only honest way to say it. Not that he left Dorothy, he never left Dorothy. But New York arrived in his life the way great opportunities always arrive, with perfect timing and terrible convenience, and he went toward it the way ambitious people go toward things that scare them. Completely. The engineering consultancy firm was prestigious. The role was exactly what his postgraduate work had been building toward. He took it with Dorothy's hands still warm in his memory from the airport barrier, and her voice still in his ear saying, "Go, I'll be here, go." She was here, he went. Dorothy finished her final year at Oxford with the specific focused energy of someone who has converted longing into productivity. She was the youngest in her cohort and the most disciplined, and her professors noticed. What they didn't notice, what nobody noticed except her roommate who said nothing, was that she checked her phone every 40 minutes with the precision of someone managing a time zone in her chest. 7 hours. New York was 7 hours behind Oxford. She learned to do the arithmetic automatically. When she woke up, he was still yesterday. When she slept, he was already tomorrow. They made it work. Letters that Dorothy kept in a box she still has. Calls that ran past midnight on her side and past 7 in the evening on his. The specific intimacy of people who cannot touch and have therefore learned to build everything from words alone. Dorothy would read his letters with a red pen, not correcting, marking the lines she wanted to remember. Some letters came back to him later with more red than black. Then the library found her again. A photographer from a London agency visiting Oxford for an editorial shoot needed a last-minute subject. Dorothy was in the architecture library, the same corner, the same Tuesday afternoon that had rearranged her life once already. The photographer stopped in the doorway and looked at her for a long moment and asked if she had ever considered modeling. Dorothy laughed. Then she thought about the tuition supplement it would provide. Then she said yes. Then 12 months later, she was on the cover of a British fashion magazine, and her architecture professors were deeply confused, and her mother was not confused at all. She told Deron on a call that stretched past 2 a.m. on her side. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Of course they found you. You've always been impossible to miss." This is the moment Dorothy marks as the beginning of the gap. Not a fight, not a decision, simply the slow arithmetic of two lives accelerating in different directions across 7 hours and an ocean. His client meetings that ran late, her shoots that ran later, the calls that went from nightly to every other night to twice a week without either of them formally deciding anything. And then there was Chantal, his assistant at the firm. Dorothy heard about her on a call in October. Chantal rescheduled the Henderson meeting. She's incredibly efficient. And filed the name without wait because she trusted Deron completely, and efficiency was not a threat. She would remember that October call later. Standing on a New York street in a coat Deron had seen only in photographs. She would remember exactly when she stopped giving names the weight they deserved. The plane landed at JFK at 6 a.m. on a Thursday. Dorothy pressed her face briefly against the cold oval window as the runway lights streaked past and felt something she hadn't felt in 18 months: proximity. Deron was somewhere in this city. The same skyline, the same streets, the specific relief of knowing that the 7-hour arithmetic was finally, temporarily, zero. She texted him from the gate. "I'm here, same city as you for the first time in forever. That feels like something." She walked through immigration with her modeling portfolio under her arm and her phone in her hand, and the particular lightness of someone who has been carrying distance for so long that putting it down feels physically different. No response by baggage claim. She told herself time zones out of habit before remembering there were no time zones to blame. He was here. 7 hours had collapsed to zero, and he still hadn't read her message. She told herself early morning. She told herself client meetings. She told herself the 12 different reasonable explanations that love invents when it is trying not to feel the unreasonable one. The fashion show rehearsal was at 10 a.m. in a midtown studio that smelled like new fabric and expensive lighting equipment. Dorothy moved through it with the professional ease she had built over 3 years, hitting marks, holding angles, communicating with her body in the language the industry had taught her. Her phone stayed quiet. She texted again at noon, shorter this time. "Hope your day is good, miss you." Delivered, not read. By 3 p.m., she was back on the street outside the studio with 2 hours before she needed to return, and a restlessness she couldn't sit still with. New York in October, cold and golden, and indifferent in the way of cities that have seen everything and are impressed by none of it. She walked without a specific direction because standing still felt worse. She turned left on a street she didn't know the name of. Then right on a street she would never forget. A midtown block, lunch hour thinning into afternoon, the city moving at its particular compressed rhythm, everyone purposeful, everyone fast, everyone going somewhere that mattered to them specifically. Dorothy slowed. Across the street outside a restaurant, Deron. She recognized him before she registered that she was recognizing him, the specific set of his shoulders, the way he stood, the coat she had seen in a photo he sent her in July. He was laughing at something, the laugh she knew better than most sounds in her life. He was not alone. A woman stood beside him, early 20s, beautiful with the specific ease of someone comfortable in her surroundings. As Dorothy watched 4 seconds, she would count them later, the woman reached up and adjusted Deron's collar. A small gesture, familiar. the gesture of someone who had done it before and expected to do it again. Dorothy stood completely still on her side of the street. The car that had been arranged to take her back to the hotel pulled up to the curb beside her, right on schedule, wrong moment entirely. The driver said her name. She looked at Deron one final time. She got in the car. 4 seconds. That is how long Dorothy watched from across the street before the car door closed, and the city swallowed everything. She replayed those 4 seconds for 8 months. In London hotel rooms before shows, on planes between cities, in the specific 3 AM darkness that belongs exclusively to people carrying something they cannot put down. She replayed them so many times they became less like a memory and more like a wound she kept accidentally reopening by trying to examine it. Here is what those 4 seconds actually contained. Deron had a client presentation at 3 p.m., the Henderson account, the one Chantal had rescheduled twice already and could not reschedule again. He had left the office early to collect printed materials from the firm's external design studio 2 blocks away. Chantal had walked with him because she was carrying the Henderson file, and because she had learned in 18 months of working with Deron that he would carry everything himself if she didn't physically hold half of it. Outside the restaurant, he stopped to check the presentation materials one final time. His collar was crooked. Chantal noticed because noticing things was her job, and fixing them before they became problems was how she had kept the job for 18 months. She reached up and straightened it with the automatic efficiency of someone performing a professional task. It took approximately 3 seconds. He thanked her without looking up from the Henderson file. She said something efficient and moved toward the building entrance. That was the entirety of what Dorothy saw. But Dorothy was standing across a street in a city she didn't know, looking at a man she hadn't touched in 18 months, watching a beautiful woman adjust his collar with the ease of someone who did it regularly. And the story her heart wrote in those 4 seconds was the only story her fear would allow. She did not cross the street. She would not let herself examine why, not for a long time. She called it pride. She called it self-preservation. She called it not wanting to be the woman who flew to New York and made a scene over something she might have misread. She never called it what it actually was. Fear. The specific paralyzing fear of loving someone so completely that being wrong about losing them feels more survivable than finding out you were right. She performed the fashion show 2 days later with a professionalism that earned her a standing ovation from the creative team. She flew back to London on a Friday morning without contacting Deron. She changed her number on the Saturday. She told herself it was cleaner this way. It was not clean. It was the most expensive silence of her life. Now Deron. Because while Dorothy was in a car watching the city move past the window, he was across the street watching a car pull away from a curb, and understanding with a certainty that settled in his chest like concrete that the woman inside it had seen him. He started moving the moment he registered the profile in the window. He reached the curb in 11 seconds. The car was already gone. Deron stood on a New York street corner in a charcoal suit, holding a Henderson presentation he no longer cared about, understanding 2 things with devastating clarity. She had been here. She had seen him. She had chosen the car. Some of us have stood on the wrong side of a street and let the car take someone we loved because asking the question felt more dangerous than losing the answer. Dorothy was not weak. She was human, and sometimes being human is the most expensive thing we can be. Deron Hayes was not a man who stood still easily. He had built his entire professional life on forward momentum, identifying problems, engineering solutions, moving toward the answer before the question finished forming. His colleagues at the firm described him as someone who was always 3 steps ahead of the room. His clients described him as someone who made complicated things feel inevitable in retrospect. He stood on that corner for 4 minutes. Not because he didn't know what to do, but because for the first time in his adult life, the problem in front of him had no engineering solution. The car was gone. The street was ordinary. The city continued its indifferent rhythm around a man who had just watched something important disappear into traffic and could not calculate how to get it back. He walked back to the office. He sat down across from Chantal and told her what happened with the specific flat affect of someone delivering information they haven't yet allowed themselves to feel. She was here. She saw us outside the restaurant. She got in a car and left without saying anything. I couldn't reach her in time. Chantal was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Deron, what did I do right before you checked the Henderson file?" He looked at her. "I fixed your collar," she said quietly. From across a street, in a city she doesn't know, after 18 months of distance. He understood in real time. The understanding arrived not gradually but completely, the full picture assembling itself in one moment like a structural calculation that suddenly balances. What Dorothy saw, what it looked like. What story 4 seconds across a street would tell a woman who loved him and was already afraid? He picked up his phone immediately. Disconnected. He called her agency. They had a forwarding contact, a London number that rang 12 times and went to voicemail in a voice that was not Dorothy's. He left a message explaining everything in the careful, precise language of a man who understood that this voicemail might be the only chance he got and could not afford to waste a single word of it. Nobody called back. Chantal tried 3 times over the following month through different channels: Dorothy's agency, her university alumni contact, a mutual connection she found through Dorothy's public portfolio. Every attempt reached a professional surface and went no further. Dorothy had not disappeared. She had simply made herself unreachable in the specific way of someone who had decided that reachable was too dangerous. The months that followed were the quietest of Deron's professional life despite being the loudest professionally. The Henderson account became the firm's largest client. He was promoted. He was asked to lead the firm's expansion into a second office. He did all of these things with the focused competence of a man who had converted something unresolved into fuel. He checked his phone every hour. Not obsessively, just consistently. The way you check a structural calculation you know should be right but cannot stop verifying. Chantal watched all of this without comment for 8 months. Then one afternoon, she walked into his office and placed a magazine on his desk face-up without a word and walked back out. American Vogue, October issue. Dorothy on the cover. Not a candid, a full editorial cover, intentional, composed, the specific image of a woman who had arrived somewhere significant on her own terms. She was looking directly into the camera with gray eyes that Deron knew better than any structural diagram he had ever studied. The building credit in the magazine's interior shoot details listed a Midtown rooftop address. He looked up the address. He looked at Chantal through the glass office wall. She was already on the phone. She was not calling a client. London received Dorothy the way London receives everyone, without ceremony and without judgment, and with the particular gray sky that makes you feel simultaneously anonymous and held. She needed both. She arrived back from New York on a Friday morning and spent the weekend doing 3 things. She unpacked her modeling portfolio. She changed her phone number. She sat in her kitchen on Sunday evening with a cup of tea that went cold and thought very carefully about the kind of woman she intended to be from this point forward. The kind of woman, she decided, who did not wait for explanations that were not coming. The kind of woman who built her life from what was in front of her rather than what had driven away in a New York car. The kind of woman who was professional and disciplined and did not check the horizon for someone who had apparently found someone easier to love than her. She was 26 years old, and she was going to be completely fine. She was not completely fine. She was professionally extraordinary. That part was real and earned and entirely hers. The bookings accelerated in the months after New York, London, Milan, Paris, Tokyo. Her agency described her as having a quality that cameras found without being invited to. She was on 4 magazine covers in 6 months. She moved into a flat in Notting Hill with windows that let in the specific London light that photographers loved and friends envied. She called her mother every Sunday. Her mother, who had raised a daughter sharp enough to build load-bearing structures and human enough to love someone completely, asked the same careful question every 3rd Sunday without varying the wording. "And how is everything else, baby?" Dorothy said fine every time. Her mother said nothing further. She was the kind of woman who understood that some structures needed to fail on their own timeline before they could be rebuilt correctly. The New York bookings started arriving in month 3. Her agent, a brisk, efficient woman named Sandra who communicated entirely in opportunities and percentages, presented each one with increasing urgency. A campaign for a major American brand, a runway show in Brooklyn, and then in month 7, delivered with the reverence Sandra reserved for genuinely significant things, the Vogue cover. American Vogue. The cover Dorothy's entire industry understood as the arrival point, the booking that changed what came after it permanently. Shot in New York. Dorothy sat across from Sandra and felt the specific geography of the opportunity settle around her like a room she hadn't entered yet. "I need to think about it," she said. Sandra looked at her with the expression of someone who had never previously heard those words in response to American Vogue. Dorothy went home. She sat with her cold tea. She thought about New York, not the fashion show, not the Midtown studio, not the industry milestone the city represented. She thought about a street corner, a charcoal suit, a collar being adjusted by hands that were not hers. She called Sandra the next morning. "I can't do New York right now," she said. "Send them my apologies." Sandra's silence on the other end of the phone was the loudest thing Dorothy had heard in 7 months. 3 weeks later, Sandra called back. The Vogue team had proposed a compromise. 1 day only. All logistics handled entirely by their production team. Dorothy would not need to arrange anything. Sandra had already confirmed Dorothy's availability before calling, a professional liberty she had never taken before and would not apologize for now. "1 day," Sandra said. "You land, you shoot, you leave. The location is a rooftop, midtown, beautiful light apparently." Dorothy wrote down the details without reading them carefully. 1 day, she could survive 1 day. She confirmed without asking the building address. She should have asked the building address. How many of us have turned down the thing we deserved because it existed in the same city as the thing that hurt us? Dorothy did not turn down Vogue because she was afraid of success. She turned it down because she was afraid of a street corner 4 blocks from the shoot location. Fear does not always announce itself honestly. Sometimes it disguises itself as preference. Sometimes it calls itself a professional decision. Sometimes it sits in your kitchen with cold tea and tells you that London is enough when you know, you have always known, that enough was never what you were built for. Some people enter a story quietly and change everything. Chantal Morris was 23 years old, efficient beyond her age, and possessed of the specific emotional intelligence that distinguished truly exceptional assistants from merely competent ones. She did not just manage Deron's schedule. She understood the shape of his life, what accelerated him professionally, what hollowed him personally, and what he checked his phone for every hour with the careful casualness of someone pretending not to care about the answer. She had understood about Dorothy within her first month at the firm. Not because Deron spoke about her constantly, he didn't. He was not the kind of man who processed things aloud, but he had a photograph on his desk that was not a family photo and not a professional contact. A candid, a woman laughing at something outside the frame, auburn hair catching light, completely unaware of the camera. The photo of someone captured honestly rather than posed deliberately. Chantal recognized the difference between decoration and devotion. She had tried 3 times in the 8 months following the street corner to find Dorothy through legitimate channels. The agency's forwarding contact, the Oxford Alumni Network, a shared connection she located through Dorothy's professional portfolio, who responded with polite vagueness. Every attempt reached a surface that was professional and correct and completely impenetrable. Dorothy had not disappeared. She had simply decided that reachable was a vulnerability she could no longer afford. Then the Vogue magazine landed on Chantal's desk before it landed on Deron's. She screened his mail. It was her job, and she sat with it for 20 minutes before she did anything at all. She read the interior credits carefully. Rooftop location, Midtown. The building address listed in the production notes was the address of their firm, not similar, not nearby, identical. Chantal understood immediately that this was either coincidence or the universe making an editorial decision. She chose not to treat it as coincidence. She found Dorothy's agency through the magazine's credits. She found Sandra through the agency's public contact directory. She composed an email that took her 4 drafts to get right, not too much information, not too little, enough to establish credibility and intent without overwhelming a stranger with someone else's love story. She explained who she was. She explained what Dorothy had seen. She explained what the collar adjustment actually was. She explained that Deron had spent 8 months trying to reach Dorothy through every available channel, and that Dorothy's changed number and professional distance had made it impossible. Then she made one request. The rooftop location for the Vogue shoot. Could Sandra confirm it was still available? Sandra, who had watched Dorothy turn down New York 7 times in 8 months, and had never once believed the professional reasons given, confirmed the location within 4 minutes of receiving Chantal's email. 2 women who had never met, coordinating across an ocean, for 2 people who had never stopped loving each other. Chantal booked the meeting room for the morning of Dorothy's shoot under a routine errand description. Organized the Henderson file review that would require Deron to collect materials from the building's rooftop storage unit, a storage unit that existed and contained exactly what she said it contained. She was not a woman who manufactured lies. She simply arranged true things in a useful sequence. The morning of the shoot, she straightened Deron's collar before he left the office. He thanked her without noticing. She watched him take the elevator to the roof. Then she sat at her desk and opened Dorothy's agency contact and typed one final message that she would not send until after, because some things needed to happen before they could be named. She folded her hands. She waited. The rooftop was extraordinary. Dorothy had stood on enough rooftops in enough cities for enough photographers to know when a location was genuinely remarkable versus simply well lit. This one was remarkable, the kind of elevated urban space that made the city below feel simultaneously vast and manageable. The October sky doing something particularly generous with its light. The midtown grid stretched out in every direction like a structural diagram she could have drawn from memory. She was between setups when she walked to the roof's edge. The photographer was resetting equipment. The styling team was conferring over something at the other end of the rooftop. Dorothy had approximately 8 minutes of unscheduled stillness, the rarest commodity in her professional life, and she used it the way she had been using unscheduled stillness for 8 months. She stood at the edge of something high up and looked at the city and let herself feel, briefly and privately, the specific weight of being in New York. One day, she had told herself, she could survive one day. She had survived the car to the building, the elevator to the roof, the first setup and the second. She had been professional and present and technically excellent, and she had not once allowed herself to think about the fact that she was in Midtown Manhattan 8 months after the worst 4 seconds of her life. She was thinking about it now. The rooftop access door opened behind her. Dorothy registered the sound without turning. The styling team, she assumed. The photographer with a set-up question. The ordinary traffic of a professional shoot day continuing around her private moment. She turned around because standing with her back to a door felt suddenly wrong. Deron stood in the doorway. He was holding his phone in his right hand with the specific grip of someone who had received directions to a location and was verifying he had arrived correctly. He was wearing the charcoal suit. Of course he was wearing the charcoal suit. He looked exactly like himself, which was the thing about Deron that had always undone her most completely. He never performed. He simply arrived. His eyes found her immediately. He went completely still. Neither of them spoke for a moment that contained 8 months of distance and one misunderstood street corner, and every unsent message, and every changed number, and every New York booking Dorothy had declined for reasons that had nothing to do with her career. "That was my assistant," he said finally. His voice was exactly as she remembered. "She was fixing my collar. I had a presentation." Dorothy looked at him across the rooftop. "I know," she said. "I figured that out about 6 months too late. Why didn't you cross the street?" She was quiet for a moment. The city continued below them, indifferent as always, as cities always are to the specific gravity of moments happening in their airspace. "Because I loved you too much to risk being wrong about losing you," she said. "So I made sure I lost you instead, which made perfect sense at the time." Something moved through his face. Not anger, not relief. Something larger than both, the specific expression of a man who has spent 8 months with an unanswered question and is now holding the answer and finding it both devastating and completely human. He crossed the rooftop. She did not step back. When he reached her, they stood close in the way of people who have been far apart for long enough that proximity feels like a language they almost forgot they were fluent in. He did not touch her immediately. He looked at her first, completely, without the management of a man performing composure, and she looked back in the same way. 8 months, he said. 8 months, she agreed. I called every number I had. I changed every number I had. I know, a pause. Chantal tried 3 times. Dorothy closed her eyes briefly. Chantal, of course. The woman who fixed his collar and had apparently spent 8 months trying to fix everything else. When she opened her eyes, he was still there. He was always still there. Across the rooftop, unnoticed by either of them, the Vogue photographer had lowered the camera from the setup shot and raised it again quietly, not as a professional capturing a location, but as a human being capturing a moment. The shutter opened and closed once. 2 people on a rooftop, not touching yet, the whole city behind them. The most honest photograph of the year. Dorothy reached up and straightened his collar. His eyes closed briefly at the gesture. When they opened, she was still there. She was always still there. They did not fix everything on the rooftop. That is the part of love stories that the glamorous version leaves out. The part that happens after the cinematic moment, when the city is still behind you, and the photographer has quietly packed up, and the rooftop access door is just a door again, and two people have to figure out what comes next with the same ordinary tools everyone else uses. Conversation, honesty, time. They stood on that rooftop for 40 minutes after the shoot wrapped. The styling team left with the specific discretion of people who understood they were witnessing something that did not require an audience. The photographer left last, pausing at the door, looking back once at the two figures still at the roof's edge, then letting the door close quietly behind her. Dorothy and Deron talked the way they had always talked, without performance, without management, with the specific directness of two people whose entire foundation had been built on intellectual honesty, and who were now applying that honesty to the most personal material either of them had handled. He told her about the corner, the 11 seconds, the Henderson presentation he had stood holding on a New York sidewalk while the car disappeared into traffic, the months of attempts to reach her that hit professional surfaces and went no further, the hour-by-hour phone checks that his colleagues noticed and nobody mentioned. She told him about the car, the decision she made in 4 seconds that she spent 8 months trying to justify with language that was never quite accurate enough, the New York bookings she declined, the Vogue cover she turned down because it existed in the same city as a street corner she hadn't been able to stop standing on mentally since October. He was quiet when she said that. "You turned down Vogue," he said. "I turned down Vogue," she confirmed. "Because of me. Because of a misunderstanding about you. There's a difference. It took me 8 months to find it." He took her hand then, not dramatically. Simply, the way you pick up something that belongs to you that you have been missing long enough to have forgotten the specific weight of it, then remembered immediately upon holding it again. The reunion did not erase the 8 months. Both of them were clear-eyed enough to know that was not how time worked. The 8 months existed. They had shaped both of them, separately, in different cities, in different silences, into slightly different versions of the people who had stood at an airport gate making promises. Not worse versions. Not better. Simply people who had been tested by distance and misunderstanding and chosen each other again on the other side of both. That choosing again, with full information, with complete knowledge of what silence cost, was the thing that made what they rebuilt stronger than what they had lost. Ernest Hemingway wrote once that the world breaks everyone and afterward some are strong at the broken places. Dorothy read that line in an Oxford library at 17. She did not understand it fully then. She understood it completely now. 3 days after the rooftop, Dorothy's phone received a message from a number she didn't recognize. She opened it. "My name is Chantal Morris. I am Deron's assistant. I fixed his collar on a Tuesday afternoon 8 months ago, and I have felt terrible about the timing ever since. I want you to know that he talked about you every single day. Not loudly. Not in a way that made the office uncomfortable. Just consistently, the way people mention things that are so present they forget not everyone can see them. I just needed you both in the same city long enough to remember that you already knew how to find each other. I hope the rooftop had good light. I specifically requested a south-facing location." Dorothy read the message twice. Then she laughed the same laugh that had filled an Oxford library corner on a Tuesday afternoon 9 years ago. Completely unguarded, entirely real. She called Deron. "Your assistant requested a south-facing rooftop," she said when he answered. A pause. Then his laugh, the one she had been replaying for 8 months in hotel rooms and on planes, and in a Notting Hill kitchen with cold tea. "Of course she did," he said. The Vogue photograph published 6 weeks later. The behind-the-scenes edition included one image the photographer had submitted without being asked, two figures on a rooftop, not touching yet, the whole city behind them, the October light doing something generous with the space between them. The caption read simply, "New York, October." The image was shared 400,000 times in the first week. Nobody who shared it knew the story behind it. Now you do. Dorothy did not lose Deron because he moved on. She lost 8 months because she loved him too much to risk being wrong about losing him. And here is what their story teaches us. The most expensive silence is the one we choose because confrontation feels more dangerous than loss. Fear does not always look like fear. Sometimes it looks like a professional decision. Sometimes it looks like a changed number. Sometimes it looks like getting into a car when every true thing in you is standing on that street corner wanting to cross. Dorothy finally crossed it. On a rooftop in New York. 8 months late. Right on time. Speech balloon comment, right on time if this story landed somewhere real for you. And if you have someone in your life who has been waiting on the other side of a street you have been afraid to cross.